Well, mine says meeting is now streaming live on Facebook. I don't know.
Good evening, everyone. This is Joanne Nodal, and I'm president of the Brazoria County Master Gardeners. Welcome to our March garden lecture. Our topic tonight is home composting with your family. And we're glad that you could join us. The Brazoria County Master Gardeners is a group of gardening enthusiasts that attend specialized training in order to be able to help you in the community learn more about gardening techniques that work in Brazoria County. We become trained and very familiar with all the different types of gardening and the soil and the climate and what kind of plants do well in your yard in Brazoria County. We have an intern class each year where we train new interns in master gardener techniques, and then they do a certain amount of continuing education and volunteer hours and become certified and join the master gardener crew. We have demonstration gardens out in Angleton, and you can go to our website, Brazoria County Master Gardeners website. I'll drop it in the chat. And you can visit there and learn more about our Brazoria County Master Gardener program, where our demonstration gardens are located, and lots of great resource information on gardening in Brazoria County. Tonight, we welcome Ann Hughes and Bridget Norris as our guest speakers on home composting with your family. And I'm going to turn it over to Bridget now. And Bridget, thanks for joining us, and let's learn about home composting.
Thanks, Joanne. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this presentation on composting with your family. We'll be giving you some ideas on how to get your kids involved with some educational opportunities. We'll go through the process of setting up a compost, and hopefully by the end of the presentation, you'll have some ideas for how you might want to compost with your kids. I'm not going to cover this because Joanne did a really good job before we started. This is the basic information about our master gardeners. Okay, what is composting? Composting means the decomposition or breakdown of natural organic solid waste. Usually composting is done in some kind of a container or pile. Why do you want to compost?
Okay.
It helps reduce the amount of waste we throw out, decreases pollution of the air, land, and water. It's a great way to get some rich, free soil amendments for your garden. It's a positive lifestyle change you can make for the future of our planet. At first, kids can learn what goes into a compost and what doesn't. And when they get older, they can learn more about layering a large compost, including the best ratios of the items you put in it, keeping the pile moist and turning the pile. As you learn more about composting, share your knowledge with your family and friends. Here's a fun suggestion. Name your compost bin or pile. That gives your compost character. You could name it Charlie and then talk about what Charlie likes to eat. Charlie likes banana skins, but he doesn't like the stickers on them. Or Charlie likes to eat dried leaves, but he doesn't like to eat plastic chip bags. Daily talks about how we need to feed Charlie, or asking them if they think Charlie's hungry. Reminding the kids to take scraps out to the pile. When kids are old enough to walk by themselves to the compost container, let them make this a daily task or chore to help with the household. To make it fun for your kids to learn about composting, turn it into a game. Get the family to seek and find 3 handfuls of items outside for the compost bin to see how fast they can do it. Or get them to seek 3 different things they've eaten that they think can be composted. There are lots of options for making your compost, from a simple pile on the ground to a deluxe, expensive turning bin. We'll show you a few ideas. You can have an open pile at no cost to you. Just pile your scraps in layers on an open area of your yard or land. Other bins can be constructed out of wood or old shipping pallets. Here on the left is Anne's wooden bin with 2 containing areas. The front boards can be removed for easy access to the humus. The back sides are made of fencing wire to help increase airflow. Thankfully, it came with the house when Anne purchased her home, so she didn't have to construct it. Lucky her. On the left is a 3-bin system made of cinder blocks. This is a more permanent system, and it doesn't rot. This is a system we use at our Master Gardeners demonstration gardens. The initial investment would be for the cinder blocks, which run about $2.50 at the big box stores. This adds up to about $90 for 1 bin, but should last a lifetime. On the right is a round leaf or straw compost bin that is very easy to construct. A roll of 100-foot wire fencing is around $175 and can make you around 8 to 10 bins. Maybe you could find a friend or neighbor who would share the cost. There are bins that you can purchase online that can get pretty pricey, but are great at keeping out large critters from your compost. The bins on the left and the right of this slide tumble your compost by turning or flipping them over, allowing you to turn the compost easily without using a spading fork. The middle left compost has a round structure built inside a garden tower, so you can grow plants on the outside and compost in the center, sending the rich humus straight to the roots of your plants. These are good for small homes or apartments. The middle right photo is of a shepherd's composting bin built in Houston by a fencing company. It can withstand harsh weather without rusting or corroding because it's covered with rubber and sealed. It's very lightweight, and you can put it together in 10 minutes. Some come with a lid and an aerator too. They run about $90 to $120. You can find the source for these in our references at the end of the presentation. Some contained composting bins work great in cities or neighborhoods with strict HOA rules about composting. So that might be one thing to consider. When you set up your compost bin, there are a few things you might want to consider, like building it near your garden and a water source is good. Remember, it composts faster and better if it's moist. You need to allow plenty of room to work around the pile because it needs airflow. So you might not want to build it next to a wall or a fence, as the decomposers will decompose the wall and the fence too. Make sure it gets good drainage and isn't in an area that's in standing water. Compost generates a fancy name term called leachate, which is a smelly liquid from the green waste breaking down. This is beneficial, but in large quantities can smell pretty bad and annoy your neighbors. Keep a distance from wells and rivers due to any runoffs from the compost bin leaking into them. Build it directly on the soil so that the worms and insects can crawl up into the pile. And I'm going to let Anne take over.
So now we will cover how to make an outside layered compost cake from the ground up. Similar to a chocolate cake filled with many layers, an active compost pile needs to have various layers to speed up the composting process. As with a recipe, we will start with the ingredients first: browns, greens, activators, and water. We'll explain each ingredient, then move to the actual mixing of the ingredients in a compost. One of the first and largest ingredients you'll need are brown organic waste. It is a good filler for the pile and helps with controlling water buildup and smells. Browns add carbon. Usually, brown ingredients are dry and look brown or gray in color. We have read and found it is helpful to have a pile or bin about 3 cubic feet in size. That seems to be the magic ideal size for a healthy compost. At first, it may be hard to obtain that many ingredients, but over time, it will build, especially if you tell your neighbors and friends you want to compost. My neighbor today brought me hay. I'm not kidding. And I put it in my compost. You can start collecting now as the leaves are falling, if you have the space. Here are some of the browns that you can add. Shredded paper. You can add shredded paper as long as it isn't the glossy kind. Glossy paper is often coated with plastic, which doesn't break down. I've decided to have a designated shredder in my home just for composting paper scraps. And then I've been tearing up my paper egg cartons and toilet paper rolls and paper towel rolls and composting them as brown ingredients. Newspaper. Newspaper is fine to use even with the color on it. It is now much safer than it used to be. Avoid adding any glossy sales flyers. Nothing glossy is allowed. Leaves and dry grass clippings. Shredded leaves or dry grass clippings are good. The more they are shredded, the better, because it helps break them down faster, and it is easier for the little microorganisms in your pile to eat. It gives them more surface area. Some people question and ask about oak leaves. They're falling all around us right now. They are tough and more acidic and harder to break down. If they are chopped, they decompose more quickly, but they are fine for a compost bin. They are organic and will eventually break down. Much better to compost them than stick in a bag headed for a landfill. Leaves shed water naturally, so they are good aerators for your compost pile. Twigs and branches. Very small branches and twigs are also okay, but it helps to first chop them up very fine. They will take much longer to decompose as well. Straw and sawdust. Pine straw, hay, and sawdust are other resources. Sprinkle them lightly over your compost, not adding in huge amounts or clumps. They are helpful to keep down flies. Pine straw adds acidity to the pile, which some plants love, like azaleas. An example, we have a local cabinet door place that spits out huge piles of hardwood sawdust that is available to the public for free. Occasionally, I'll load up my plastic trash bin and go get some to add to the compost. Another one is hair, of all things. If you cut hair, compost it. Ask your hairdresser if you can compost their hair for the day when you visit them. You might get some strange looks, but you also might encourage more composting in the long run and get people to think about how they dispose of their waste. I recently asked my hairdresser, and she bagged up a trash bag full of hair that I took home and spread out in my compost bin. I worked in my compost today, and the hair does tend to clump, so you might want to sprinkle it around instead of just throwing it in a big pile. Another one is cotton balls or cotton Q-tips. They compost. Wood ash, not charcoal ash. And nut shells from pecan, peanuts, and pistachios. You could just have brown ingredients in your pile, and that is it. I did this for years, only composting my leaves annually, so they wouldn't be put in a landfill. It just takes a long time to decompose, only brown ingredients alone. And the compost cake isn't as tasty to the composting critters. So, to spice up your compost cake and bring on some heat, add green ingredients. Green brings in helpful microbes like bacteria and fungi, which heat up when decomposing. You don't have to have as many greens as you do browns. Some recommend a 4-to-1 ratio of browns to greens, some a 50-50 ratio. Either will work and create decomposition. In general, it is better to have more browns than greens. Greens are items that are not just green in color. Greens add nitrogen to the compost, which is good for enhancing the green color of plants. Greens usually have a high water content to them. These are some examples. All fruit and vegetable scraps are good. It helps greatly if you chop the larger ones up, like melon rinds, broccoli stems, corn cobs, avocado seeds, and peels. A good rule of thumb is to chop up to about the size of a quarter. It isn't required, but it does help speed up the decomposition, and it assists the critters in getting to the scraps easier. It makes it easier to fit into a container in your kitchen as you gather them. Citrus. Some people don't compost any citrus, claiming it is too acidic and harmful. From my experience and reading, it is fine to compost all citrus waste. Just be sure and cut it into small pieces, and don't add too many at a time, filling your compost bin with them. Citrus has a high nitrogen content. The oil in citrus peels is a natural deterrent to pests and scavengers. They don't like the scent. Also, ants tend to not like lots of citrus, so citrus can be a deterrent to them. Tea leaves and coffee grounds are compostable and considered green waste as well. Throw in your coffee filter too, as it is paper and will decompose. Yard clippings. Any green waste from your garden or trimmings is okay as long as it doesn't have disease or is poisonous. The tougher the plant, the better it is to chop it first. A mulching mower can help. I run over a pile of leaves from a cast iron plant that I thinned out, and my mower bagged and chopped it all up for me very quickly. Out at our master gardens, our main compost guy, Paul, runs a tiny push mower over the scraps and cuttings to chop them into finer pieces before adding them to the compost pile. Eggshells are also okay to compost. Crushing them will speed up the process. They give the compost some wonderful calcium content. And lastly, herbivore manure. Any herbivore manure is very, very good for the compost and attracts decomposers faster than anything. Examples are cow, horse, chicken. And I have read that it is helpful to make sure herbivore manure is dry first before adding. Carnivore manure or waste is not beneficial as it breeds harmful disease. Examples of this are cat and dog poop. There are no-nos. I went out to a friend's in the country and gathered up piles of manure into a plastic trash bin with a lid on it. Most of the piles were already dry, and so it wasn't too smelly. I brought them home and added to my compost and felt like it greatly sped up the composting process, and it brought in many beneficial microorganisms. It helps to have friends who have animals who wouldn't mind sharing. Maybe a local 4-H could share. Activators. So add activators to generate heat and speed up the baking process. The first one I just mentioned, and that is herbivore manure, not carnivore waste. You could do cow, rabbit, chicken, horse, and they're good examples. Meals. Now, meal is not what you had for supper. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about things like bone meal, hoof meal, fish meal, or alfalfa pellets. All of these have been ground down, and so they're very, very compostable. The alfalfa pellets are about $7 at a store, and they're used as food for guinea pigs or rabbits. And they can be sold at a feed store or some of the big box stores. Soil is another activator, and it brings in microbial activity. And the last is compost. Save some compost from an old pile to start a new one. Or gather fresh compost from woods where nature has already generated natural compost for you. The final ingredient is water. It is important to sprinkle your compost with water if it is dry. You want your pile moist, but not dripping wet, like a well-wrung out sponge. Moisture brings decomposition, and it invites microorganisms to come live. Too much water can kill worms and valuable insects, driving them away. Our composting couple out at the Master Gardens sprinkle their compost pile after tending to it, as a rule of thumb. It helps them remember to keep it moist. Now
Hey,
it's
Ann.
time. I'm sorry, what?
Hey, Ann, it's Joanne.
Yes,
Can I ask a couple of questions?
absolutely. Bridget can help me too.
Hey,
Go right ahead.
Bridget.
Go right ahead.
So we have a question from the chat. Brittany, one of our viewers, has one of those black bins that rotates. You familiar
Yes.
with those, where you put the materials in and then you can rotate the bin?
Yes.
And she says that over the years she's added a lot of green items and maybe not enough brown. And it's been a year and everything hasn't broken down as she expected. She's wondering if this is more of a water problem. Maybe she's not getting enough water in the bin, or do you think that she needs to add more brown content? What will help break up the material faster into compost?
I have one of those, and
Go
I've
ahead.
had the same problem. It's because she's not putting enough brown, and you don't need to add water, but you need to add things that are moist. Like if you're putting in your kitchen scraps, or if you're putting in like your garden scraps, like what you've pulled up from the end of the year. But if you get the balance right, which you do understand that brown, it needs more brown than green, because that's going to help break everything down. And then the same thing that she was just talking about, you might, from the activator, you might need to add a little bit of compost or a little bit of manure or something to get it started cooking. But Anne, you may have some suggestions too.
Yeah, my first thought was activators and follow maybe some of the examples that we suggested, a little bit of water. But like I said, with my own compost, I felt like the manure just jumped it to another level. And I know manure is very hard to find. I think though you can buy bags of it, if you don't have somebody that has any. But alfalfa pellets too, apparently are an activator as well, and those can be bought. But that's what I would say too.
All right.
Keep trying
That's good
and
to
keep
know.
trying.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Any
don't
other
stop.
questions? Was there any other questions that I needed to address here? Or?
Not right now. Continue on. Thank you.
All right. So the finished slide, yes. Now it's time to mix your compost cake batter. Turn your layered cake a bit with a spading fork after you add water to mix ingredients together. You can repeat the 4 layers above till your pile reaches about 3 feet high. That is as high as a person can typically handle. Water each layer and mix it before adding the next layer. If you don't have that much material to compost, just make a one-layer cake. Now the microorganisms will go to work breaking down the ingredients into rich humus. Let it sit undisturbed for about 3 weeks. If you want faster, hotter compost, mix the ingredients with your spade, fork, or shovel every few weeks. But this isn't necessary unless you want fast decomposition or a hot compost. On average, a compost of this nature, especially if it's turned, will decompose in around 3 months or so. Many variables can affect the speed, so we cannot say the exact time when it will all be decomposted.
Okay, maintaining your compost bin. Composts need a bit of maintenance to help generate heat and speed up the decomposition process. Here are some of the regular maintenance tips. Continue adding your food scraps, which is green, and the approved brown waste. It's best to dig a hole in the middle of the bin, add your scraps to the hole, and bury your waste to help move it down to the decomposers' homes. Cover over the new addition with leaves, sawdust, or your compost debris. Covering your fresh waste helps keep down flies and smells. Turn your bin every couple of weeks to add airflow and oxygen to the microbes. Add a little water if it's too dry, and if it's too wet due to lots of rain, add more brown. What not to put in the compost? You don't want just any ingredient in your compost cake. There's a few items that will mess up the process, and here are some of those. Meat and bones, they attract rodents. They take forever to decompose and breed harmful diseases. Commercial companies compost meat and animals, but they know how to do it, and they do it safely and on a large scale. You can't put dairy products in. You can't put fats and oils of any kind. And then carnivore pet waste that we talked about before, like cat and dog poop. You don't want to put disease or poisonous plants, yard waste treated with chemical pesticides. No chemicals in your compost. Stickers on veggies or fruit tend to not decompose. And weed seeds, although their weed seeds are organic, you probably won't generate enough heat to kill them, so it's best not to risk using them. Synthetic fibers, and then plastics of any kind. Now it's time to let another cook come to the kitchen to finish your cake. All throughout your compost, decomposers quietly move in and start their work making compost cake for you. This starts the baking process. Some of these decomposers are so tiny they can only be seen with a microscope. Thus, they are called microorganisms. These are the families of, and I have tried to say this word 1,000,000 times, but I can't ever remember how to say it. Actinomycetes, fungi, and bacteria. Here are some teaching opportunities for the kids to learn about how the process of decomposition works while they wait and watch for the rich humus to form. These microorganisms need air and moisture to breed. And that's why it's so important for you to turn your pile and keep it moist. Then there's composting critters. This is another educational opportunity that could involve teaching kids about the critters in the compost. These are larger decomposers that you can see with the naked eye. We've got pill bugs, earwigs, fire ants, snails, beetles, and earthworms that are just some. You can take a field trip to the library and check out books on compost critters and read all about them. We'll have some listed in our resources at the end of the presentation. One activity that we've seen done is to have your kids or students dig up some active compost and put it on a plastic tray. Let them try to identify as many visible decomposers as they can. Have pictures to show them that they can look at to see what they look like. And to add to the fun, get out a magnifying glass so they can view them up close. Then we have the final product. The most rewarding part comes when you're finally able to harvest and use your rich humus from your compost. The original organic materials have transformed from what they were to a new usable substance that benefits our environment. When this occurs, the pile will no longer generate the active heat it once did. Finished compost looks dark and crumbly and has a real earthy smell. The volume of the pile is usually reduced by half. This could take 3 months to a year, depending on how many factors. If a compost has been maintained well, it can be a consistent source of soil amendment for your plants, and it's free.
Harvesting your compost. That is exactly what I did today. After a period of time, take off the front of the compost bin, and the one right up there on the picture is mine that I worked on today. It should be towards the compost should be towards the bottom of the pile, and often it will be in rich, dark chunks that are crumbly. You can see my bin here in the photo and how the lowest layer has that rich humus in it. I move aside the upper layers and I dig in with a spading fork to harvest the humus. When I want to harvest a lot of compost, I sift it through a handmade strainer that fits over my wheelbarrow. That's in the right photo. It's like a large picture frame with plastic mesh stapled around the edges. This helps remove any larger items that didn't compost and breaks it up into usable texture. Any larger pieces go right back into the compost bin to continue composting. You can use compost as a rich mulch around garden plants, similar to bark mulch. It protects the soil and it shades out weed seeds. As it rains, the nutrients in the compost leach into the soil to feed the roots of the plants. Compost is great to mix in with new plants along with a good potting soil. It adds beneficial microbes to the plants where you distribute it, strengthening them. In sandy soils, it helps the sand hold moisture, and in clay soils, it helps break down the thick, sticky clay. I put the finished compost on my lawn and in my potted plants. You can put them in your garden as a top dressing. It is excellent amendment for your lawn, giving your yard an extra boost. Unlike fertilizers, it's not harsh and it won't burn your plants. If you don't have a yard or plants, you can share it with friends or neighbors. It would be such an added blessing to a local park or nonprofit organization. But just make sure you ask before you hop over and put it in. A common way many compost and don't even realize it is to leave the grass clippings on your lawn after mowing it. It will decompose, adding valuable nutrients to it. This would only be if you're regularly maintaining your yard and cutting it often. Here are several other methods of composting or using compost. And I'm not going to go into each one, but just mentioning them so you know there are other options. Online or with books, you can find a wealth of information on each of these topics. Plastic bag or glass jar composting. That's a mini composting, and I will explain that after I do this slide. It's something you can do on a small scale indoors. Vermicomposting, which is just a fancy word for worm compost. Compost tea, and that's made from steeping a bag of compost in water, and you pour it on plants as a rich amendment. hugelkultur, which is a mound culture type of composting, cool composting, and tumblers.
There are many options for composting, especially if you don't have time or space for a larger bin. There might be a community compost bin at a community garden near you where you can contribute. Consider saving your scraps, mowed grass, or raked up leaves for a trip to the community bin. Form or join a group composting project through an organization or neighborhood. It can still teach your family how to dispose of their waste in an eco-friendly way. One local example is the city of Richwood. They have a community-wide composting area they set up near a community garden, where it is easy for people to pull into the parking lot, quickly get out of their car, and dump their green or brown waste into several available bins. From this effort, they have collected 25 gallons of compost from 3 bins. All this stayed out of the landfill and contributed to a wonderful, healthy garden for the public.
If you'd like to start composting on a very small scale to show your kids the potential, this project is for you. It would be good for schools, clubs, or home situations. I found this simple recipe in a composting book that could be easily done with available ingredients. They claim in the recipe that in 6 weeks you can have finished compost. I wasn't able to finish the project in time for this talk, but my ingredients are already looking much like humus. And I started this recipe in February. Mix up these 4 ingredients in a sealed jar or a baggie. I found that the jar worked best. 1 cup of green waste chopped into quarter-sized pieces, half a cup of soil, that's your activator, which adds microorganisms, 1 tablespoon of alfalfa pellets. This is again another activator. Alfalfa is rich in protein, vitamins, and minerals, and it has the ability to improve the soil's structure. It's also good for roses. And 1 ounce of water. Daily mix your ingredients by shaking them up. Kids love doing this, but be careful if it's glass, as it might break. A baggie works too, but I found it was more smelly and wet. Continue to shake the ingredients daily for about 4 to 6 weeks. Air is key. Open the jar lid every other day to allow air inside the jar for the decomposers to breathe. This is what my mixture looked like after 3 weeks of shaking and baking. The baggie got smelly and much more wet, so I added some sawdust and I squeezed it in to make the mixture drier, and it helped cut down on the smell quickly. How do you collect your kitchen scraps? Well, everybody's got different ideas. Here's mine. I have found that these plastic shoe bins work great at holding my compost scraps from the kitchen. I have bought and tried a fancy stainless steel bin with a filter, and it really was just a waste of money. I like that these are clear so I can see if I need to empty them. The lid is secure, and they only cost $1.70 at the big box store. They are also portable. I have taken them to some events I attend where I know there will be vegetable or fruit scraps present, and I ask people to throw their waste into the bins so I can take them home. Usually people are very agreeable, and it can lead to an awareness of composting and landfill waste. I rinse out my bins after I dump them so that the smells and the flies don't build up. And then I store my bins in my laundry room stacked up where I can quickly reach them when cooking. That way I'm more likely to use them. It is now a personal new habit and a lifestyle that I have changed. Bridget stores her kitchen waste in a baggie in the refrigerator or freezer. Both keep down flies or smells, and freezing can help speed up the decaying process by breaking down the cell structure of the plants.
This slide has all the references of the books, the newsletters, the tools, the presentations, and the websites we used while researching for this presentation. You'll find lots of information on composting. I hope we've given you some ideas and some reasons that you might want to compost at home with your family. Thank you for joining us, and we'll take any questions if you have any at this time.
Hey there, it's Joanne back again. Thank you for the presentation. It was great, and I love the idea about making the small compost sample bin in a baggie with children to get started. That's a great idea, and something that can be done as an activity with junior master gardeners or Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts. That's great. One question for you guys. I don't know if you have had this experience or stumbled across this in your research. But when you throw your coffee grounds in the compost bin, you mentioned throwing the coffee filter in too, which I do. And I kind of wondered over time, when you get coffee filters, they can either be the white, which has been bleached, or you can get the brown, which I guess is a more natural unbleached coffee filter. Have you guys seen anything, or do you know if there's any reason why you would not throw the white ones in the bin? Would it have any effect on the composting process?
I don't think so. I mean, personally, I think the heat is going to destroy anything that it could be harmful. I think they do that because, yeah, I think it's bleached, but I don't think there's enough in it once it's broken down to have any problems with the compost. Anne, what do you think?
I am composting all kinds of paper and it's been bleached, and I'm shredding it in my shredder and I'm putting it out to compost. I do wonder if bleached paper takes a little bit longer to decompose, and I'm kind of experimenting with that. So out in my compost, I have leaves. In fact, I have 3 bins that are just devoted to browns, and that's all they are. And they're separate. And I've got a layer of leaves. I've got a layer of literally white shredded paper, a big, thick 6-inch layer. And I'm kind of watching it to see what happens over time. But I know for sure the brown falls apart a lot faster, maybe. I mean,
Yeah, I think so too.
That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. And yeah, I do throw a lot of paper, and I always used my shredded paper as a feed for my compost. So that all makes sense. And I'm with you. I would think it would decompose so quickly that any additives to the paper or the filters or whatever, the heat will just take care of that.
Right.
yeah, the only one that we saw was questionable is glossy paper. And I can see why, because that's why the stickers on a banana peel won't decompose. And they're kind of glossy, and they have plastic, I think, on them. And plastic just doesn't decompose.
Right. That's a good point. So as long as the paper doesn't have a glossy finish to it, that would make sense. All right. Well, that's all the questions. And we thank you very much for taking the time to make the presentation. This was great.
You're
Thanks for
welcome.
having
Thank you
us.
for asking us. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. I'm still on, but I don't know.
Oh.
Should I get off and leave?
Oh, yeah.
I thought we would do a wrap up. Oh, well.
Oh, well, I
wondered
think
what they.
no, I think it was great. I think it went fine.
Okay. I wondered how they felt. Okay. Well,
I'm sure, yeah, it would have been nice if she'd have done a review, but that would have been something she would have had to do. And I don't think they're going to do that. She probably made up that last question just to sort of have something else to say.
yeah. Yeah.
But that's
We-
fine. I'm sure that there'll be more people watching it later than they did tonight.
Yeah. And it's short. It won't drag out too long for them.
You did
You did
good.
good? Yeah, you did good too.
Well, we're at 45 minutes now, so we did our 45 minutes.
Well, and that was with a 5-minute introduction. So really we
That's
were at,
right. That's
oh,
right.
we could have fit in some other things, but that's
Yeah.
okay.
Well, we
We'll
know that. I mean, we can add them later, or we can add some stuff.
That's-
And this is definitely more of a kids oriented. We need to
Yes,
work on
yes.
just a real composting one. So, but thank
Yeah.
you. You did a great
Thank
job.
you. Thank you for all your technical help.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for all your writing skills.
I'm getting better, right?
Well, have a good
All
evening.
right.
Did
You
that
too.
lady come?
No, no.
Okay. All right.
No.
Talk to you later.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Hey, Emily.